Hello my noodle friends! We have recently come back from our best trip to Japan ever. It was pretty long, almost a month, and we visited so many new places. And one of the things that we decided to do this time was to go to each one of these new places and try a new type of ramen. We thought that it would have made sense to try like the local specialty in each of these cities, but in the end it didn't quite work out because there's just so many types of ramen in Japan, and a lot of these are not like super traditional or super local, but we really wanted to try them anyway. So yeah, this video is the one where we take you to all these 7 places in 7 different Japanese cities, and we're gonna show you more than 7 different types of ramen from Japan. So first on our itinerary was Tokyo. We thought that the safest bet would be to go to the Tokyo Station's Ramen Street, which is like a little part of this underground bit of the huge train station in Tokyo, where there's a lot of food going on, but there's this like specific part of it that's just ramen shops. And the one we chose was called SORA no Iro, which is a vegan ramen shop. The great thing is that one of my favorite ramen types is the tantanmen. So that's like the Chinese style noodle, which tends to have a base of some sort of like animal broth and a lot of sesame paste mixed in it. So it has this like nutty, like super rich, super fatty, tasty texture. It also has some mints and chilies and cucumbers in the original version, but in this one obviously there was no mints, but instead there were pine nuts, and it was pretty spicy, pretty tangy, but otherwise super satisfying, super rich, and it kept me filled up forever. So if you're a vegan or if you just like exploring vegan options, this is a great place to do it in Tokyo. From Tokyo, we took an 8-hour train up to Sapporo in Hokkaido, which was our first time to go to Hokkaido at all. It was amazing. The traditional ramen in Sapporo is apparently the miso ramen. So that again would have some sort of like animal-based stock and miso, which, you know, adds a nice kick of extra umami and possibly some healthiness, but like probably not really. Plus, the Sapporo ramen traditionally also comes with a slab of butter on top and also sweet corn. The one we found and we thought looked really appetizing was at a place called Zero Ramen. It was in an area called Tanuki Koji, which is one of those like covered shopping streets in Japan. This one was really long. It was really close to the big park in the center of Sapporo. Anyway, their ramen looked a bit less traditional than what we expected, you know, from those like pictures you get in guidebooks, but it was still super delicious. The interesting thing about it was that it had this like almost like a char-grilled flavor all like throughout the broth, and this like big thick chunk of meat, and yeah, it was a very pleasant surprise. Our next stop for just one night was Sendai, and the reason we stopped was actually a ramen shop where I went last year, and it's actually in one of my videos from last year as well, so if you want to see it twice you can go and rewatch my videos from Sendai. Anyway, this place is called, and I keep forgetting it because it's complicated, it is called MENYA TOGASHI RYUKO, and they specialize in broth that implements a lot of either fish or shrimp. So like one of the types is roasted shrimp, just like blitzed into their, I believe, pork-based broth, and the other one is the fishy one, and it's kind of like a smoky fish, like think smoked mackerel. If you like that, if you like that sort of like rich oily taste of smoked mackerel, then that one would be the one for you. You can also get it in a spicy version, which is the best. And their tsukemen is also amazing. If you don't know, tsukemen is the type of noodle where you have the noodles on the side and you just kind of like dip them in this thicker, sort of oilier, richer version of their ramen broth. So yeah, so you just kind of give it this like overall of slick oiliness and flavor. Yum. After Sendai, we went up north through the Japanese Alps to a city called Kanazawa, and the ramen place we visited there was called the Hachiban Ramen. And Hachiban Ramen isn't necessarily like a Kanazawan specialty, it's actually a chain, but what we liked about it is that their menu was really extensive. So if you have friends or family members who are quite picky or who have like a very specific thing they either do want or do not want, it's kind of nice to go to a place that offers more than just that like one specialty, which is what a lot of the smaller ramen shops do. So I tried a different version of tantanmen, which by the way, I think that I prefer the vegan one to this one, but Simon got like a Chinese style hot and sour soup ramen with like a lot of like Chinese vinegar on the side. There was really like no other ramen we tried on our trip, so it was definitely worth visiting this place. Yummy. Also, that was the day when we spent like 8 hours on an open air train during a storm in the Alps. So I think that any ramen would have been super delicious at that point, but from what I remember, it was great and it's worth visiting. After this, we had a whole bunch of nights to spend in Osaka, and let me tell you, the ramen I had there was probably my favorite of the whole trip. The place we visited was called KIOU Ramen, and again, I believe this is a chain, so if you look up the name, you might be able to find their shops all around Japan, not just in Osaka. Anyway, one of their specialties was the tomato ramen, and I kept seeing it for like 3 days until I was like, this needs to be our ramen for Osaka. It looked so good. One of the versions was without cheese and one of them was with cheese, that's sort of like grilled with a like kitchen torch, the way sometimes you get sushi done. It was so good. Like, how is that not a thing? Basically, it would be like chicken stock and tomato base just mixed together with herbs, and then you have this like delicious chewy ramen noodle, and on top a bunch of kind of like chewy cheese as well, so it like just adds to the fun texture of the whole meal. It was comforting and tart at the same time, so like these two sides of the flavor were really complementing each other, meaning that I was for once able to just finish the whole thing. I had to. It's kind of like when you eat like chocolate covered pretzels and the saltiness and sweetness kind of neutralizes each other, which means that then you end up eating like 2 bags all at once. So yeah, tomato ramen, the chocolate covered pretzel of ramen world. In Hiroshima, we found this cute little place that was called TORI no SUKE, and they specialized, apart from the more traditional ramen, in Taiwanese style noodles. Those would be kind of with almost no broth, just like a tiny bit of broth at the bottom, but a lot of stuff on top. So you would get like tiny roasted shrimp, which add really quite a lot of that like fishy umami taste, and garlic and veggies and egg. And that was really good too. Like, clearly not the most like Japanese style noodle, but who cares, right? Tasty. Our last stop was Yokohama, which in many ways was saving the best for last, because Yokohama is where you can find the Ramen Museum. It's actually not in Yokohama, but in Shin Yokohama, which is kind of like a sub-part of Yokohama between Tokyo and Yokohama. So if you're staying in Tokyo and not Yokohama, it's going to be easy for you to get there anyway. No worries. It's a place where you can learn basically everything about the history of ramen in Japan, the way it made its way into Japan from China and how it expanded. And you will also find out that like the super Western popular tonkotsu ramen actually hasn't been popular in Japan until like the 80s or something. It's not a super traditional type, but in the West, everyone loves it. But I would say that the main attraction of this museum is this sort of like a retro village that's kind of like underground under the museum. You get 7 different mini ramen shops where you can try different types of ramen, and you can always buy either like a full-sized ramen bowl or a mini-sized one, but the mini-sized one is kind of like 2/3, so don't worry, you're gonna get filled up even if you try just one anyway. We tried a classic KIOU, then a kind of a thick noodled spicy miso, which was really good and quite tangy. And the last place we tried was a place that was like a special guest from Canada, and they also specialized in miso ramen. One thing I would like to point out though that is quite problematic when visiting the ramen museum, especially in a couple, they will not let you into the mini restaurant if you're not both buying a bowl of ramen, which especially if you're not coming with someone who's physically capable of eating, let's say, 3 bowls of ramen, will mean that you will eat some of your ramen alone, which I feel like for a Westerner sometimes can be like a bit depressing, especially, you know, if you're on a trip, like if you're on a romantic trip, honeymoon or whatnot. Keep this in mind, like they are quite adamant about it, as you can imagine, you know, Japanese people like their rules, so you will not talk yourself out of this rule. So those are our 7 amazing ramen places that we visited this time around in Japan. I could probably visit like 20 more if I was staying just a tiny bit longer. I think that next time it's going to be really hard not to go to all of these that were all great, but instead to try some new ones. Anyway, if you have any tips for great ramen in Japan, let me know in the comments below. The one I can't stop thinking about is definitely the tomato one, and I will have to try and recreate it at home. I already bought all the ingredients, and perhaps if you follow me on Instagram, this one or this one, I might update you on my endeavors in trying to recreate the amazing tomato ramen. Hopefully you guys loved this video, hopefully you loved watching all the sexy shots of ramen that Simon helped me shoot, and I'm gonna see you soon. Bye!